Here we go. The very first live stream. I just want to make sure I've got everything set up right. So give me a moment. All right, I'm gonna send out the message too that we are live. All right. So thank you everyone who is here watching the live stream. This is the first time that I've done this, so I am really nervous about this. If you have any suggestions or comments how these could be better, things you would want to see me discuss in one of these live streams, feel free to leave a comment. Hey Doc, see you in the chat. Love it. All right. Great. So Doc, you can give me some live feedback if you want about all the mistakes I'm making here. But yeah, I tend to, hey Michael, I tend to, I've done a lot of webinars and things like that in the past, but just showing up live talking is kind of freaking me out. So I have some slides and actually a presentation that I've gone over before on creative systems, and have that to fall back on, I guess, but also happy to just answer questions, I guess, that anybody would have on the creative process here. Yeah, I met Doc and Katie at the MaxDoc conference in Woodstock, Illinois last weekend. That's kind of why I'm doing this right now. Got enough of a nudge to try the live thing that scheduled the first one here, and yeah, we're gonna give it a shot. If you all like this kind of thing, I'm thinking I'll make this a regular thing, but yeah, let me know. All right, so I guess this. I'm still trying to figure out Ecamm a little bit. I'm trying to figure out the differences between like the standard webinars I'm used to doing and these live streams. So I think what I'll do for this one is just share my slides, walk through the Creativity Flywheel framework, but I would love for this to be a little bit more interactive. So I'm not just going to fly through the presentation. If you've got questions as we go, please answer those, and I'll try to adapt this to the things that people have questions about. Less scary than table topics. That's to be determined, I think. Cool to see so many people in the chat here. So thank you, Natalie. Paul looks like from Ecamm. Gabor, Brandon. I really thought I would show up for this first one, and maybe there would be nobody here. I just shut it down and go home. But yeah, it's cool to see people hanging out here. So all right, so I worked with Katie, I worked with Doc over the weekend, and I got my Ecamm scenes set up. I'm going to try to transition these here to the presentation mode. All right, hey, look at that. think we're good. So the Creativity Flywheel that I wanted to talk about today, this is something that's really important to me, and it's something that actually was sort of born out of a presentation that I gave at MaxDoc a couple of years ago. I was thinking through just how creativity works, and at one point I actually thought I wasn't creative, and then I got involved with a online productivity training company, and at one point, person who thought he wasn't creative was responsible for a blog post every week, a new video course every single month, a podcast episode every week. And I just kind of did it. I flew by the seat of my pants, and just, kept saying yes to stuff and then figuring out ways to make it work. And then I started thinking about how was I able to actually do this sustainably. And that was, I kind of reverse engineered it. I'm a systems thinker, so that's kind of where the Creativity Flywheel came from. By the way, appreciate the comment, Doc, about it looking phenomenal. All of the slides that you're going to see here, this is a sketchnote font, but all the images I drew in GoodNotes on my iPad. That's part of my creative journey. It's why I embrace this style when I talk about creativity, is because I wasn't really ever an artist either. And I just kind of did it over and over again. And yeah, exactly. Start with small steps. Oh, is Jill here? No, I guess not yet. But start with small steps. That's Jill McKinley. Jill from the Northwoods. Met her at MaxDoc a couple years ago too. But yeah, it's the iterations, and that's why I use the flywheel concept. So to begin with, what does the Creativity Flywheel do? It's really for developing ideas, and everybody has ideas. The quantity and the quality of the ideas, I believe, depend on the types of inputs that you consume. Hey, there is Jill. Okay, awesome. And I want to, with these live streams, contribute positive sources of information, not just things that are going to be entertaining. There's a place for that, but I want this to actually have a positive impact in people's creative journeys if I can. That's a big part of PKM for me, personal knowledge management. So what exactly is an idea? Dictionary.com defines it as a thought or suggestion as to a possible course of action. What's interesting to me about this definition is that an idea really is an imaginary representation of a tangible thing. So it's not really something that is real yet. When you have it, you have to do something with it. And Thomas Edison is the one who said that the value of an idea lies in the using of it. So as long as you just think about an idea, it's kind of worthless. If you just have ideas, but you never take action on them, they're really not making any difference. They're really kind of worthless. But it's hard to put a monetary value on an idea, because a single good idea can completely change your world, if not the world. I believe that every incredible invention that we can point to started life as an idea, and you kind of have to get good at managing these. In fact, John Steinbeck is the one who said that ideas are like rabbits. You get a couple, you learn how to handle them, and then pretty soon you have a dozen. But remember, they're worthless unless they're acted upon. So how do you know if an idea is any good? My personal opinion, I don't think you can at the beginning. You don't really know initially, which is why it's important to have a system for developing these ideas. So that's what the Creativity Flywheel is. That's where personal knowledge management is interesting to me as a topic, because when most people think of PKM, personal knowledge management, they think of apps like Obsidian, Rome Research, and all of those connections. And just if you have like all of these different notes and you just make all these connections, then the insights are magically going to come. And that's not how it works. You have to work with these things. You can't just dump them in there. So when I think of PKM, I think of it as a greenhouse for developing my ideas. I put the good ideas, the seeds, in there, and then I give them the ideal conditions to grow, and I see what develops. And that's why a system is important, because you don't, some of them aren't going to pan out, but if you've got a system and you constantly have new ideas coming in, then those that don't pan out aren't really that big a deal. So just like a garden, you don't really know what's going to grow from those idea seedlings that you have. And you don't want to give up on them too quickly, and you also don't want to try to make something out of them that's not really there. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I actually struggled thinking of myself as creative. That's why this topic is so important to me. The words actually came out of my mouth. I guess I'm just not creative. The story behind this, I play currently bass guitar on the worship team at my church. I played guitar for a long time, and in college, I liked to write songs. So I would write a song, spend hours crafting this song, then go out to eat with my friends and hear a song on the radio, and I'd get frustrated because I would realize that I had just like ripped off a chord progression or a melody line. And I would get upset and think to myself, well, I guess I just don't have that creative gene. Other people seem to be able to like catch lightning in a bottle and do something amazing with it, but I guess that's just not me. I don't have that ability. And it wasn't till later that I realized that creativity is simply connecting dots. Austin Kleon with the book Steal Like an Artist was the one that really drove this home for me, where he talked about your job is really just to collect dots. When you're creating something new, you're just connecting these dots in new and interesting ways. But the dots themselves aren't completely original, and that was really freeing for me. I realized that creativity is really a formula, or said a different way, it's a system. And you don't need to judge the output. And I kind of experimented with this a little bit. I realized that, or I had this theory that if I just improved the quality of the inputs, the dots that I was collecting, that maybe that would have a positive impact on the output. And spoiler alert, that is exactly what happened. So I started reading more books, getting these ideas, and then those were the seeds of the things that I was creating consistently for the blog posts and the podcasts and the video courses. So it kind of unlocked my true creativity. And so this is, the one thing I want to drive home to everybody who is watching this. If you are like me and you thought at one point that I guess I'm just not creative, you are creative. Don't believe that lie. One of my favorite quotes is by Hugh MacLeod, and he said that everyone is born creative. Everyone's given a box of crayons in kindergarten. Then when you hit puberty, they take the crayons away and they replace them with history, etc. And being suddenly hit years later with a creative bug is just a wee voice telling you, I'd like my crayons back, please. So, hey, Scott, good to see you. The thing I love about Ecamm, to be honest, I was thinking about this with MacStock, is it makes it so easy for people to create something. And yes, this is a little bit terrifying to me to do this live, but I think more people need to be freed to tap into that inner creativity. And then there's something magical that happens when you express that creativity. With personal knowledge management, I see a lot of people just like collecting things and they have all the crazy connections and they have those big like murder board style graphs with all of those lines going all over the place. But if there's no output, there's no value with that. There's really nothing of value coming out of all of those connections. And that's really where the rubber hits the road, in my opinion. That's the part that keeps people from taking action a lot of times, is they don't take that final step and they don't make something. They don't put it out into the world. So going live here, what this is forcing me to do is just get it out into the world without thinking about it first, without really having it all scripted. That's the scary part for me. I'm definitely an analytical planner. I like to have it all worked out ahead of time. So I got to practice what I preach here, right? And give it a shot. But really the thing I think people need to be asking is, where is the kink in the hose? If you have trouble creating consistently, doesn't mean you have to have a podcast, doesn't mean you have to have a YouTube channel. Although that wouldn't be a bad thing. You need to have some sort of output. You collect all this information, you make sense of it, and you have to figure out something that you're going to make out of it. You got to connect those dots in new and interesting ways. That's a requirement, I would argue. You really can't reach your full potential unless you lean into that. So the Creativity Flywheel framework that I'm about to share here, hopefully will give you a little bit more freedom to do that. Some people push back against structure. They like the idea of being spontaneous, but in my opinion, when you figure out how the systems work, your life is made up of both independent and interdependent systems. And when you figure out how those systems work, you can affect the outputs by tweaking the inputs or the processes. So that's what we want to do with the Creativity Flywheel. I want to give you a framework for developing and managing your ideas to free up your brain to do what it does best. All right. So creating excuses is still creating. Touche. Yeah, just like not making a decision is actually making a decision, right? So the first step of the Creativity Flywheel here is to capture. And this is the most straightforward one, so I'm going to move quickly through this one probably. But Once an idea is gone, it's usually gone forever. So you probably heard, on the paper, off the mind. I make sure that I capture everything without worrying about whether it's good or bad. That's the key here. So you want to capture things really without the filter. You want to capture the things that resonate. And I like the word resonate because I grew up playing the violin. It's an acoustic instrument and it resonates. You draw the string across the bow and the whole instrument reverberates, so you can feel it. So when you're capturing something, really what you're looking for are things that are resonating in your soul, things that are reverberating inside of you, things that are interesting to you, not just things that you think might be important later, someday, maybe, right? So capture all that stuff, put it in an inbox, and then you can go through it later. But if you don't capture it in the moment, then it's a lot of times it's gone forever. Emile Chartier said that nothing is more dangerous than an idea when it's the only one that you have. So you really need a way to consistently have an inflow of new ideas. I was asking people at MaxStock during the capture phase, like, how many things do you capture in a given day? And I think the average was about 10 different things. Now, not all of those things immediately go on to the next steps, right? We want to be willing to chuck those and start over if those things aren't any good, but we really do need to pay attention because great ideas can come from anywhere. The important thing really is to be ready when an idea comes. So at this point in the process, you want to eliminate as much friction as you can. When there's more friction in the capture phase, it's more likely something important doesn't get captured. So that's negative at this point in the process, but it's not always negative. In fact, yesterday I recorded the next focused episode with David Sparks, and the whole episode was on, actually no, that was the one that I published yesterday. It was on intentional friction and just discussing, where friction is good, where friction is bad. At this point in the process, when you're capturing things, friction is bad. Okay, so the question that you're asking at this point is really any chance that this thing that's resonating might be important, and if there is, then you want to capture that. So Doc has always wanted to play violin. Dude, you should totally pick it up. I actually started playing violin when I was 5. That was the main instrument that I played. I played it. I still played a little bit on the worship team at our church, but I grew up playing classical music, and classical just isn't my jam. In college, I played with like the Green Bay Symphony Orchestra, but I don't know, classical music doesn't really do it for me. I like a little bit more alternative, some punk, reggae, like all those different styles. I actually like playing bass for those different, where you have to use different techniques, like playing slap bass is one of the funnest things I've ever done. But yeah, violin is it's a tricky instrument because there's no frets. You have to really just get used to putting your fingers in the exact right places in order to make the right note. But it's a cool instrument for sure. All right, so in terms of capturing, I did want to real briefly talk about the exception to this, which is the way that I take notes from books that I read. The way I take book notes is going to look very contradictory to everything that I just shared. It's actually not, but you have to understand a framework for this too, which is the 4 levels of reading by Mortimer Adler and How to Read a Book, where the elementary level, the first level, is really just what does the sentence say? The second level is inspectional reading. That's kind of where you're figuring out what the book's about. The next level after that is analytical reading, where you're starting to have this dialogue with the author and you're figuring out what they're saying and making judgments on the arguments that they're presenting, deciding for yourself what you think about it. And then the last level is syntopical, where you place the ideas that you have just wrestled with in that book alongside other things from other books that you've read. That's where the magic happens, in my opinion. But the way that I take book notes is a little bit goofy. So I use it. I take book notes in MindNote. I always read physical books. There's just something about reading a physical book. It lands different. But I take the notes on MindNote on my iPhone. And the first thing I do is I put the image, the book cover, in the middle. And then I kind of break this apart for the different sections. So there'll be a different branch for every section of the book. And then that'll break down into chapters. I'll jot down the things, again, that resonate with me. I'm not trying to recreate the whole structure of the book. I used to do that. I used to like not enjoy reading books because I would try to jot down everything that seemed important, and it was very overwhelming. So I gave up on that, and I jot down the things that I really like from the book. Now, Atomic Habits, I really enjoyed that book, so there's a lot here. And there's also a bunch of emoji in this image, which you may catch. I have my own emoji tagging system. Basically, I came up with this before MindNode supported tags, but I use the light bulb icon for inspiration, the key for the key ideas. The quote bubble is for quotes. The talking head, a lot of these books I read for the Bookworm podcast, so that actually is like the talking points that I want to bring up in the podcast. So as I'm reading, I'm kind of fleshing out the outline for the podcast as well. And then every once in a while, I'll come across a statistic that just kind of blows my mind, and then I'll use that mind blown emoji. But what I like about MindNode, and the reason I use my phone as I'm reading a physical book, is that I can also open up the camera and I can attach key visuals, which looks something like this. Now, so this is from Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg, but there's some graphs and things, and I can just take the picture, crop it, drop it right into the MindNode. Side note, Obsidian released their bases feature. Well, it's not available to the public yet. I guess it's still in beta, but 1.9.4 brought bases, and one of the views of bases is these card views. And I'm actually revamping my database inside of Obsidian, where I've got the image, the rating, the year that the book was published, the authors. That's just my rating, by the way, and then the number of pages that are in the book, all in these card views. And there's something like 220 book notes in there. I've got to add some additional ones, but when that is ready to go, I'm going to be sharing that publicly. All right, so that's the first step, capture. Now the second step is to curate, and this is where things get interesting, because capture is all about just eliminating the friction, grabbing every single potential good idea that shows up, right? But when we curate, we're adding friction back in. And in fact, the word curate literally means to select, organize, and look after items in a collection, like a curator in the museum. But the things that aren't in the collection are just as important as the things that are. So at this point, you're embracing the role of the curator of the museum of your mind, which means that you're judging your ideas, but only after you've gotten some distance from them. So I capture them, they go into an inbox, but I don't automatically pipe those in. I go back and I look at those things at a separate point later. You don't want to judge your ideas when you have them. You do want to judge them before you add them to your collection. I've found that giving my ideas time is actually how I can see what they really are. I tend to get very excited about new ideas. I constantly want to try new things and experiment. And I've found that, if I capture something and then I come back to it like a week later, one of two things happens. Either I'm more excited about the idea because it really is a legit good idea, or the moment has passed and I'm like, that's not that cool. I don't need that anymore. And I'd say probably about 90% of the things that I capture, I actually just end up throwing in the drafts archive. So I forgot to mention that I capture my ideas using drafts on my iPhone. I use Whisper Memos on my Apple Watch now because you can just hit the button, it automatically starts recording. But with Whisper Memos, I also have it set to pipe into my drafts inbox via the email address feature. So everything ends up in drafts, but then I go through that drafts inbox about once a week, and then I bring over the really good stuff into Obsidian, and then I develop it. But the thing I really just want to drive home right now is that I believe urgency is a parasite. Every idea appears life-changing the moment you have it. It's going to dominate your time, energy, and attention if you let it. And the way to beat the urgency is with intentional friction. So that's why you don't want to just transfer all these things automatically. And as you pick and choose the things that you're going to actually put into, in my case, Obsidian, but really the place that you're going to develop these ideas, what you're doing is you're making your own mental maps. Okay, so in PKM, there's this concept of map of content, and I don't think I really like that term because it tends to function a lot like an index, but I like the metaphor of the map a lot. Okay, so the map is not the territory, it's actually a mental model that I picked up from the Great Mental Models, Volume 1 by Shane Parrish. And in there, he talks about this mental model. He's not the one who came up with it, but he described it pretty well. So when you're looking at a map, basically, it's a representation of the territory, and it's not going to have all the information that the territory has by definition, because if it had all that information, it would be as big as the territory it was supposed to represent. So it'd be completely useless as a map. So when you look at a map, you're looking at what someone, the cartographer, has decided is important for you to know. It's someone's opinion of what landmarks are really important. And when you're thinking about like driving directions, we never really think about that because it's pretty straightforward. We need to know the major landmarks, we need to know the roads, things like that. But when it comes to creating these mental maps, there are no, like, you have to do it this way guidelines, and that's actually a good thing. So if you embrace the role of the cartographer, you get to decide what's important enough to appear on these maps. Sorry, Jill and Rachel, for scarring you with that drawing of the parasite. But the whole idea behind the map is that you get to decide what really should be on there. And when you are creating these maps, when you are bringing things over to add to them, you want to make sure that you have more signal, less noise. Okay, you want the things that are really meaningful. You don't want just the random bits and bobs. You don't want the random pieces of information. And the analogy that I like here is that, if you're trying to listen to one of those old time radios and you got the analog dials, right? Sometimes you'll get a signal with a lot of static. You can still hear a little bit what the person is saying, but there's a lot of noise, which makes it difficult. And then when you really just dial it in, then you eliminate the noise, that's when the signal becomes clear, right? So same thing with your ideas. The more noise you have there, the harder it is to tell what any of them are really saying. So you don't need a whole bunch of ideas. What you need is clarity to make the most of the ideas that you do have, right? The quality of the output from your idea system depends largely on the quality of the ideas that you feed into it, not necessarily the quantity. The quantity is really just the thing to make sure that there's a constant inflow of these ideas. And we want to continue to capture those, continue to curate those, continue to develop those, and build momentum. Once you start collecting valuable ideas and creating your mental maps, it's actually a little bit addicting. But you cannot keep everything. You cannot catch them all. So you have to say no to, I would argue, the majority of the things that you do end up capturing if you want to ensure that the ones that make it into your system are really going to be valuable. So there's this concept of FOMO, the fear of missing out. I'm sure people are familiar with that. There's an alternate version of that, which I really like, and that is JOMO, the joy of missing out. With FOMO, you feel pressure, like you should constantly be collecting these things because the answer to your problems is more information that is out there somewhere. You have no idea where it's going to come from. But JOMO, you kind of are able to turn off the spigot for a while and not worry about what's out there. You're able to focus on what is in front of you, and you really can play with that and develop it and see what's really there. It's a curiosity that is part of that. Tiago Forte, Building a Second Brain. You guys are probably familiar with Tiago. He said that in order to let the great ideas shine, you have to cut the merely good ones. So when you only have a handful of really great ideas that you are working with, there's actually something magical about that. You'll be shocked if you've never done this before, and it can feel really scary to cut things loose, especially when you are still in that FOMO because you feel like, maybe there's something here that could change my life for the better. But really, it's the process that provides that the real progress. So the key question here really is this important enough to add to the collection? Remember, we've captured them to a separate inbox. In my case, it's drafts, and then curating is when we bring over, my estimation, 10% of those things into Obsidian. We decide what we're going to do with those later, and you can, use whatever app you want for developing those ideas. And even Apple Notes would would work for that sort of thing. You don't need to have a fancy plain text note-taking app with a whole bunch of plugins to refine those things. It's one of the things I like about Obsidian, but at its core, it's just a markdown text editing app. And really it's the figuring out for yourself what you think about those things and forcing yourself to have an output. That's where the real value comes from. All right, so we've captured, we've curated. The next step then is to cultivate. And this is where, we have the idea greenhouse and we let these things mature and we figure out what we've actually got to work with. So Rachel is in the chat. She joined because I was afraid nobody else would be here. And so she can correct me if I'm wrong, but she's a photographer. And when she was in college, she actually developed her own film in a darkroom. And when you were developing film, you would take the picture. You didn't really know what you had until you got into the darkroom and then you developed the picture. I think that is a great analogy for working with ideas. You don't really know what you've got at the beginning. You kind of have to go through the process. And the thing about the darkroom at that point is, the image is what it is. You're not trying to change the image in a certain way and make it better than what you originally captured. There's no pressure to make this image be more than it really is. Okay, so you're just trying to see it for what it really is. And I think that's kind of what's happening in this cultivate phase. Now, great ideas are constructed. They don't happen by accident. So I think that there are tools we can use to develop these ideas, but we don't want to put too much pressure on any one to be the be-all, end-all idea. I used to do this with writing. I'd get an idea and I didn't have a big idea bank to draw off of, and I had an article that I had to deliver in the next week, and it's like, I really got to make this idea turn into something. And sometimes that pressure, well, not sometimes, most of the time probably, made it way harder than it needed to be. I tend to overcomplicate things. But one of the things that I like about cultivating ideas, or the ways that I like cultivating ideas, is by using mind maps. Okay, so I actually, when I have an idea, I put it in a mind map like this. It's not just for book notes. This is actually like an article that I wrote for this Sweet Setup a while back on PKM. And, at Macstock, there were people talking about how, well, my brain doesn't work that way. I'm not a visual thinker. I'm just going to use outlines. I would push back on that. I think that there are definitely, we all have our preferences. And honestly, my default preference is not to create a mind map like this. I am a very structured outline type thinker. But when you work with your ideas in an infinite canvas like this, it forces you to think about things a little bit differently. And so if you really want the outline, MindNote will give that to you. You have the outline on the left. But when you are working with these things and you're just kind of just grabbing your ideas, moving them around, then this actually helps you develop the idea more fully, I think. I think you see things differently when they're laid out on a workbench like this than they are when they're in a linear outline. So I actually think this is a very valuable process that is a lot like sharpening your mental saw. There's a quote, something along the lines of, if I had 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend the first 4 sharpening the saw, attributed to many different people on the internet. But the principle is definitely true, that when you sharpen the saw, it makes the work easier. So mind mapping for me is like sharpening your creative saw. It makes writing much easier when I sit down and I mind map it first. As I mentioned in my talk, I think a lot of my mind maps are actually, they look pretty lame because it's just the title of the newsletter in the middle and then a couple of nodes around it. And even just doing that is enough to provide me the clarity that I need to move forward with what I want to write. The more time that I spend mind mapping, it's like pre-work for when I actually sit down to write. And I estimate that every 1 hour that I spend mind mapping saves me about 2 hours when it's time to actually sit down and write. That may sound a little bit extreme, but I really believe it's true. The work that I do at the beginning, just fleshing out the ideas, that's the thing that enables me to just sit down and crank out the words. But you do need to have time to just think about these things. So one of the tips that I give people with personal knowledge management is to actually schedule thinking time on your calendar. I have a regular thinking time block every Friday morning. And sometimes I know that, this is the project that I'm working on, and so that's when I'm going to mind map these things. Sometimes I go into this and I'm not really sure what I'm going to just wrestle with mentally, but it is important, I believe, that you have this time set aside, because thinking about the work before you just jump in and do it, before you just jump in to do it, this is one of the things that we feel like, oh, I don't really need to do that. Yeah, it would be nice if I could squeeze that in, but I don't, ain't nobody got time for that, basically. There's too much to do. But again, this is one of the most productive things that you can do. So I do highly recommend that you regularly create the space for this, even if it's only like an hour a week. One of the ways that I like to do this is to go for a walk. So whenever I am struggling with something and I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to go with this, getting away from my desk, walking, there's a trail actually by the co-working space downtown that goes through the woods, and it's right by the river. So getting into nature, going for a walk, Cal Newport calls this productive meditation. You think more creatively when you are in that sort of environment. And so those things can be helpful when you're just trying to play with ideas and see what you really got to work with. Key question here, though, really, it's anchored in that curiosity. It's what is this really? You're trying to see things for what they really are. You're not trying to make something out of nothing. That is a very important point. All right. The fourth step is to connect things. And this is where things like Obsidian come in. Now, with Obsidian, I don't actually have any live demos of the screencast type stuff, but I have lots of YouTube videos on this sort of thing if people are interested in it. If you have questions of what I'm talking about with this connecting ideas, happy to go deeper with this, but also think maybe people understand this already. So in Obsidian, for example, you can put double brackets around some text, and then that will create a link to that text as the title of a new note. So what you can do is you can connect your ideas this way. And there are some built-in features to these different apps that I wish weren't there. So you can, in the little backlinks section, I think this is still there in Obsidian. I haven't looked in a long time, but there was a button where you could I'll take an Ecamm mug. I should have grabbed one when I was at Macstock. You can create these links for every note that has that title. And that's where the danger comes, I think. So, for example, I've got a podcast called Bookworm. And so I could open up the Bookworm note and I could go to the links section and just find all of the unlinked mentions and click a button and put double brackets around every instance of Bookworm in the entire vault. That is not the way to do this, though, because when it comes to the connections, you want less of these, but you want them to be more intentional, more important. The less, it's kind of like when you're capturing ideas, you only want the best of the best to be transferred over. Well, this is kind of like another level of filtering where only the real important connections are the ones that you would make this way. So when I'm making connections, I'm making them manually, and I'm making them only when I realize that there is a connection between these two different notes, not just because the text happens to be the same in both of these notes. Hopefully that makes sense. But what that does then is it allows me to surf the connections of these notes and discover new, like second, third, fourth level connections, because each one of those links really means something. So that's where the local graph comes in for me. The little thing, I drag it into the lower right corner of my note, and it only shows the notes that point to the note or that note points to. So it's just one level deep. It's not the whole big graph view, which honestly I think is kind of useless. But when I'm looking at my notes, I want to be able to see all the notes that point to that note or all the notes that that note points to. This was actually the first thing I did in Obsidian. I created my own cross-reference library from all the different sketch notes, sermon sketch notes that I took. So I would take sketch notes and I would link all of the individual verses, and then I can click on a verse and I can see all of the other sketch notes that point to that verse. And then I keep all of those inside of one Obsidian vault with all my other stuff, because I like to be able to make these connections across different domains. That's where the real interesting stuff happens for me. So create these connections intentionally, and what that does is it primes the pump when you are sitting down to create something. So every once in a while, I will get asked to preach a message at my church, and the first thing that I'll do is I'll open up my most recent sermon sketch note, and I'll just kind of follow the chain, follow the curiosity, and I'll open up some of these different sketch notes side by side. So I'll create this little workbench with a couple different sermon sketch notes on there, and then having all those things laid out in front of me, that's the thing that kind of triggers new insights for me, and always gets me going when it's time to start crafting the message. So if you do a little bit of work connecting your ideas, then once you do that, your brain just kind of continues to work on those connections in your subconscious. And really, that's what it's wired to do. That's what my brain was doing back when I was reading all these books, even before Obsidian was a thing. My brain was making these connections between these different things that I was reading, and then distilling it down, and that was the stuff that I ended up creating. So it requires really that you're always looking for those new connections, okay? And then you're making those intentionally. What those allow you to do is come at your different notes from different directions, okay? So let's just explain this for a minute. Top down is maybe the default way. So if you've got a folder structure, you can go into one folder and then go to the next folder and go to the next folder and just kind of keep drilling down into that folder structure. That's one way to get to a file. But with these connections, you can actually do it the other way, or even, side to side. So the hierarchy kind of doesn't matter when you have these bidirectional links. What's a bidirectional link? It's basically when you add double brackets to a note title, so you create a link, that is now a two-way street. Okay, so with the standard wiki links back in the day, you could make a link from note A to note B, but once you went from note A to note B, there was no way to get back. You had to create a separate link to go from note B to note A, if that makes sense. With the bidirectional links, you don't have to do that. Just one link is enough to allow you to go both directions there. And then you want to experiment with these. So you don't want to assume you know where an idea is going to take you. You want to allow yourself to be surprised. And the key question here, going back to the how to read a book, the 4 levels of reading, is how does this connect with the other things that I've collected? Okay, so this is something that you can do at any point in the process. I've added it here as the 4th step in the Creativity Flywheel because I like to kind of do this as a final check before I would sit down to write. But then the final step is maybe the most straightforward. That's where you actually sit down and create something. So all the way back to the beginning, you want to take action on the things that you have collected. You want to make Thomas Edison proud. You want to take action on your ideas. The hard part is resisting this until the time is right, till those ideas have been developed and you see how they fit together. I like to think of ideas as individual mental Lego blocks. And this part where we're creating, this is really where we're taking all of those individual blocks and we're putting them together. Now, what's beautiful about this with this flywheel is that if at least for me, as I go through all these different pieces, by the time I get to actually sitting down to write, it's kind of like just following the instructions. It's pretty easy. I don't have to dread the blinking cursor and feel like I don't know what to say because I've done the pre-work here. Now, here's the important thing that I think is we can't forget this as it pertains to creativity and why I like the framework of a flywheel. I believe your mind is like a water wheel. So water goes in, it creates motion, and then it leaves. When the flow stops, so does the wheel. Now with a flywheel, every time you turn a flywheel, it gets a little bit easier and it produces a little bit more. That requires that the information, or the water in this case, flows freely between all the different steps, right? So nothing is acting as a bottleneck at any point in the process. But at this point, if you don't have the output, that's the easiest place to identify that the water wheel is not turning. And the minute that you start having an output, that's when you really start to gain the clarity. There's a thought or a quote I like by Dawson Trotman: thoughts disentangle themselves through lips and pencil tips. And I would add also clicky keyboards. There's this concept of an opinion note that a lot of people will talk about in Obsidian, which is really just you sit down and you write down what you think about a thing. I've done this before, especially with the topic of habits. That's the example that I share a lot. And there's something magical about this. Okay, so when you feel that mental squeeze point, basically, we're like, I can't really put my finger around what I think about this. For what I do in that situation is I open up Obsidian and I force myself to start typing. Lately, I've been trying to explore that a little bit using some audio tools too, like VoicePal. But I don't think anything really beats the clicky keyboard and a blank note for me. And it's amazing when you sit down and you actually just start typing what you think about something, how it all starts to fit together. That's where you really see the pieces fit together and you see the big picture. So the key question at the end of this, at this point, it really doesn't require a public output. It doesn't require a public blog. It doesn't require a YouTube channel. You can get started with your Creativity Flywheel simply by creating these opinion notes. But I think there is something valuable about putting it out into the world because it is a little bit scary. You do have to overcome a little bit of that fear. And what that does is it forces the feedback loop to be completed. And then you learn more from that when you do it. But at this point, really, you just have to ask yourself, what do I actually think about this? What do I think about everything that I've researched on this topic? And Rachel can confirm this is this is a trap that I fall into frequently. I tend to over-research everything, even small decisions like $10 purchases. I'll spend 3 hours doing internet research. It's a bad habit. So at some point, you just gotta do something with it. Here are the 5 different steps coming in for a landing here. So what we've talked about: capture, curate, cultivate, connect, create. So this is it in a line, but this is not actually linear. So this is a flywheel, like I said. What that means is that when you capture something and you curate those things, you put them into your idea greenhouse, you cultivate them, you connect, and then you've got the output and you create something. The minute that you create something, especially if it's public facing, the feedback loop has now been closed and it primes the pump for capturing the next thing. So when you finally get to the create phase and you put something out into the world, what it does is it creates these open loops in your brain, which makes it easier to capture things that could potentially be useful. Until you get to that point where there is an output, everything feels like it could be important. It's hard to tell what's the actually useful stuff. But the moment that you create something, it's like you get that thing published, and regardless of how much of a perfectionist you are, I am definitely a recovering perfectionist. So I've definitely been there, and I, obsess over this thing. And then until you actually hit publish, until you actually put it out there, you don't really learn from anything. My first podcast episode, it was a 30-minute, it was like a beta podcast. I recorded it with the other co-host, and a 30-minute episode, and I was responsible for editing. So we had the outline, we recorded, and then I spent like 8 hours editing this 30-minute podcast because I realized how many ahs and ums I had. And what that did is it showed me, this is something that I needed to improve. So I joined a Toastmasters group, and that cleaned, just that awareness, cleaned it up considerably. But there are lots of other examples where I feel like it's perfect. I throw it out into the world and then I get some feedback and it's like, oh, I missed that thing. I didn't know what I didn't know. So putting it out there, that's really the only way to understand that those sorts of things. And what that does is it just opens up your eyes to ways that it could be better. And then you do that, dozens of times, hundreds of times. At this point, thousands of times for me. Every single time you get a little bit better, as long as you're intentional about it. You can't just keep throwing stuff out there and just assume that the quality is naturally going to improve. You have to have a growth mindset. And you got to be willing to look at, what could I have done better? That retrospective process is really important. So if you're going to build your own creativity flywheel, what does this look like for you? Well, actually, before we get that, let me just share kind of the pieces that I use for mine. So I mentioned at the beginning, drafts is really where all of the things get captured to. So no friction at that point. We want just to throw those things in an inbox. And then about once a week, I'll go through there and I will bring over the really good stuff into Obsidian. Everything else I'll archive. When I capture things into drafts, usually it's with the format like idea, colon, and then the idea so that I can tease those things out very easily when I am processing that inbox. Once they get into Obsidian, depending on the type of information, it may just sit in I actually have an inbox folder in Obsidian if I'm not sure what something is going to be. I've also got my own system for developing my creative projects. Maybe that's another live stream at some point. I've got these Kanban boards basically associated with the different types of creative projects that I do. So for YouTube videos, I actually script those, and I've got a folder full of text files for all of my video scripts. I've got metadata properties so I can track, what stages those are in, manage those on a Kanban board. When I bring them from left to right, the status automatically updates. I've got an article on my website, practicalpkm.com, where I walk through that and link to all of the plugins, but I'm actually working on a YouTube video for that as well. So I've got one of those for video scripts that uses a specific type of template file. I've got another one for newsletters, and I've got another one for articles. So all of those use different template files, but they all kind of function the same way. There's Kanban boards for all those different writing projects, and then I link to the files so that when it's time to work on that idea, I'm right in Obsidian and I can just start typing. When I'm cultivating these ideas, I'm doing that in MindNode, and that helps me see what the structure should look like. When I'm connecting those things, that's in Obsidian. And then the last part, I actually do all of my writing in Obsidian. I actually think Obsidian is very underrated as a writing app. Number one, you can use the plugins to really craft whatever sort of writing setup you want. I'll see if I can. Let me open up Obsidian and I'll see if I can demo that. Normally when I demo this stuff, I record the videos and then I embed those in Keynote, so it's a little bit tighter. But if you don't mind a little bit of clumsiness in the demo, I can probably walk you through some of this stuff. But yeah, Obsidian is where all of the creating actually happens. Kanban, yep. All right, so when you're building your creativity flywheel, this is kind of the process here. You need to identify what you're going to use to capture. Again, eliminate the friction, know where that stuff belongs. And then when you are going to curate that, where do those things get moved to? Then what are you going to use in order to cultivate your ideas? Again, I really advocate for MindNode and mind mapping. What are you going to use to connect those ideas? Where are you going to create? And then I would encourage everybody to have a public output. So where are you going to publish it? My website, Practical PKM, that actually is a pretty new website. I am publishing via Ghost, and I'm using, Matt Birchler has a Ghosty Posty plugin that he uses, which allows you to publish to Ghost as a draft. Okay, so let me open up Obsidian here, and we can take a look maybe at some of the Kanban stuff. All right, Obsidian. Okay, whoops. Let's make this a little bit smaller. All right. Okay, hopefully this is coming through okay. This is the new Bases plugin. I think I mentioned this a little bit, but so these are what my book notes look like. I've got the tags, the author, the rating, year, pages. If we've covered it for Bookworm, I'll link to that here. 3-cent summary, the mind maps from the book notes, and then the text-based version of all of this. So I've got, the light bulb. Those are kind of the moments of inspiration, key ideas, quotes, things like that. That's not what you asked about, though. What you asked about was the Kanban. So let's open up writing projects. Okay, let's look at video scripts. Okay, so what this is a Kanban board where things go from idea to backlog, in progress, review, and then published. And yeah, this is the one that I'm currently working on right now. So these are just cards. When you add a card, you can put any text here you want. So it's just text, and the way I'm linking these to the individual notes is just with the double brackets. So if I go back here and I do, okay, text, that's going to link to a file which is actually called text. It's a little bit grayed out because that file does not exist currently, but that's how this works. And then what these do is when you open these, I'll hit Command click to open it in a new tab. It actually shows the published date, in progress. I have a video editor that I work with, so this is where I'll link to the Notion card for this, where we'll talk about title, thumbnail, stuff like that. But all this text right here, this is the script that I throw into Teleprompter Pro when I am over there in my office recording the YouTube videos. So when I'm managing these, I'm actually just dragging these from column to column. Now there's a couple plugins that are driving this. The first one is the excellent Kanban plugin by Greg Myers, MG Myers, sorry. There's a couple things in here that are worth calling out. Let's see. Where was that setting? Oh, right here, this inline metadata. Merge with the linked page metadata. What this allows you to do is in those cards, you can actually show like the published date below the card. So I don't think I have one of those for the YouTube video scripts because I'm still kind of getting in a regular rhythm with those. I'm trying to publish every week, but I don't do that all the time. However, with the newsletters, I do have these, and so actually this one is finished. I should drag this over to publish, but you can see what this looks like. It actually, because I'm linking to this note, which has a published date of 7/14, this is the one I sent on Monday, it actually will pull in the published date below the title of the card and the link to the file. So that's pretty cool. I like being able to see that. And then all these ideas, backlog, these are things that I'm going to be working on. Now, the other thing that's cool about the way this is set up is that when I drag these cards to a different column, the status on the card actually updates. So if I decide I wanted to talk about the Feynman technique, for example, you can see the status here is backlog, okay? And it's using the newsletter template. But thanks to a plugin called Kanban Status Updater, when I drag this to in progress, okay, this will now update. Might take a second. No, I'm not sure why that one didn't work. Let's try that one more time. Of course, when I try to demo it, it doesn't work. There we go, in progress. So as I drag the cards, the status automatically updates thanks to that Kanban Status Updater plugin. And to set that up, basically what you need to do is just put the status property name. So in this case, it is status. And then it looks for all of the places that have that. And if you want to make sure you've got it set up right, it'll tell you like this. Okay. I do love my clicky keyboards. So the one, if people are interested in this, I don't know if they are, The one that you maybe heard just now, that is a Mode Sonnet keyboard, which is my favorite clicky keyboard of all time. But I also have over on the other desk a Keychron Q1 with, what are those keycaps? Well, they're extended 2048 keycaps. They're made to look like the old Apple Keyboard 2. Oh, dude, you should totally make Ecamm shortcut keycaps. That would be awesome, Doc. And the switches are Zelios, I think. They're the tactile ones that aren't super clicky, but they do definitely have some clack to them. All right, so that's the Kanban status updater plugin. Now there's one other piece of this which I think is really cool. I picked this up from a library member. The library is my private PKM community. You can find out more about that if you go to library.practicalpkm.com. I just revamped that, so there's actually, it's $49 a month, but you pay for the quarter, so you don't have to pay for a whole year at once. But you get access to Life HQ, my Epic Done For You Obsidian Vault, and you get all of my courses, all of my cohorts, all of the live workshops, things like that. So go check that out if you're interested. But someone in the library was talking about quick add. And so I put together this quick add macro. This may be one of my more favorite things that I have ever put together inside of Obsidian. Let me show you how this works. So we'll look at the newsletter idea one here as an example. So this is actually the command that we're going to run. But the macros actually live in here. So with the newsletter idea macro, what this does is it, number one, creates a file, and then number two, captures something to the Kanban board. So when I create the file, it's going to create it in the, using the newsletter template, the value. So this is double brackets, value, colon, what's the big idea? That's going to provide a prompt where it's going to ask me what the idea is, and it'll take the text and it'll capture that, and then that's going to make that the file name .md basically. And then it's going to create it in the folder newsletters, and that's basically all for this one. So it's going to create that file first of all. Second of all, it is going to capture to that Kanban board. It's going to capture as a task because that's how it handles the cards, and it's going to insert it after second level header idea. So that's the column for the ideas on the Kanban board. And then the capture format again is going to be value, colon, what's the big idea. So I answer that prompt once and it takes the input and applies it twice. All right. So this command, or this macro then, this two-part macro, is assigned to this command right here, newsletter idea, when I run it. Okay, so let's go back here real quick. Let's view this actually as a markdown file, just to show you what this looks like. Here's the second level header idea, and here are the tasks for the different notes. Okay, so let's go back to this as a Kanban board. All right, so I want to capture a new idea for a newsletter. Command P to open the command palette, search for newsletter idea. Hit enter, it's gonna open up that prompt. What's the big idea? Using Ecamm for live stream. All right, now when I click OK, watch what happens here. Okay, there's the link. So it created the card, but it also created the file in the appropriate folder and applied the appropriate template. So this is the cool thing about Obsidian. It's basically like with the plugins, you can create your own scripts. Like I don't know how to write Python or JavaScript or anything like that, but I can hack together stuff using like templater and things like that. And it's all plain text, and it can just, bam, 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 do a whole bunch of things which streamline the creative process. And that's really the challenge, is inserting friction where it should be and removing it where you don't want it. So for me, having to create the file, then come back and create a card and link to it, that's additional friction that is worth me figuring out a system to automate that. And then from here, we can drag that to the different columns and the status gets updated. So hopefully that was helpful Shadow Shan, if you have any additional questions, follow-up questions to how that all works, just let me know. Happy to answer them. But I think that is about all I've got today. So appreciate you being on, Paul. Everybody else, thank you for being here. I don't mind hanging out a little bit longer if people have specific questions about anything. I see your chat. I see you scheming to go steal my keyboards. I do have a couple extras. I probably have, between here and the family place in Door County, I think 5 or 6 different keyboards. Yeah, don't judge me. Why do I use whisper notes when the drafts complication actually, let me try this. Okay, so eCam feature here. If I can click on this, I think this, add to broadcast. Hey, there we go. Cyberbob City says, why do you use whisper notes when the drafts complication can automatically start recording your voice on your Apple Watch? I just think that whisper notes is a little bit easier in terms of less friction. I don't really know. You're right that the number of taps that it would take to automatically open up drafts. I could do that, but whisper memos is just super, super fast. And then I also like how whisper memos doesn't just capture everything verbatim. It kind of cleans up your ahs and ums. So it gives you a cleaner version of what you have captured. So it can be a little bit rough and you're not going to see all of that word for word in the transcript. So yeah, I actually was very much against using a different app for that. And then David Sparks finally got me to try out Whisper Memos, and I do really like it. I also like with Whisper Memos, you can record up to 90 minutes of audio. I've never come anywhere close to that, but I do like being able to record longer audio files there. Maybe Drafts can do that too at this point. I don't know, because I know VoicePal also does 90 minutes for a limit. So maybe that was just an iOS thing that got updated recently. All right, let's see. Answered that one. Okay, Victor's got one here. Do I recommend paying for sync? Using SyncThing, and it's a hassle, but it's free. That's a tough one to answer, Victor, because I think there are legitimate reasons to pay for sync, but I also wouldn't fault anybody who doesn't want to use it and just wants to save some money. Okay, so I like paying for Obsidian Sync because of a couple things. Number one, it has revision history. So I can go back and I can revert files if I want. You could do the same thing with GitHub too, but it's really well designed inside of Obsidian that way. And also it's end-to-end encrypted, and you can use selective sync. So what I have on my Mac, I sync everything, but I actually don't download all of that stuff when I open up my connected iOS vault. It's much smaller, the amount of things that I am actually going to pull into that vault. So you have a lot more control. It's very secure, and you have some additional options. But if you just want a copy of your vault different places, then you could use, I'm not familiar with SyncThing, but I think that would probably work just fine. Dropbox I've used in the past. I liked using Dropbox. The problem with Dropbox was that pretty sure it choked on emoji, and there was something else with it. I forget specifically what it was. The one I've had trouble with is iCloud. And the reason I have had trouble with iCloud is just because it would try to be smart about what files should actually be downloaded to your device. Theoretically now you can pin files in the Files app. So you can make sure that your Obsidian Vault is always downloaded so it doesn't take forever to open whenever you open the app. But yeah, I just don't trust it at this point. Ooh, thank you, Doc. Prefix questions with a Q. Love that. All right, so we'll do that next time for sure. Okay, so Doc uses Super Whisper in Drafts. Double tap the back shortcut to start recording. Ooh, nice. I like that. That's a cool idea. I've not done anything with that back tap shortcut, but I know a lot of people who do use that to trigger some sort of some capture. Cool. All right. Any other questions? Scrolling through the chat, just trying to make sure didn't miss anything. Cool. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you, everybody. First live stream was honestly a lot of fun, and much more activity in the chat than I was anticipating. So thank you for that. I'll try to do these, I think, weekly. The Wednesday 12 p.m. time. Actually, I think I talked to Doc about this at MaxDoc. This was the recommendation based on time zones. But if there's, something different that works for people, happy to adjust. This does work pretty well for me, so I like. I think I could probably make this work more often than not. Cool. Thanks for the feedback, Jill, Bob, Doc, everybody else. This was a lot of fun, and we'll wrap this up. If you have any topics you'd like to see me cover, please let me know. I guess we could just do like Q&A sessions too, if that's of interest. I guess I got to chat with Doc more on whether you need like a specific topic every time you go into one of these, or how that all works. How different was this live versus your MaxDoc talk? Quite a bit different, actually. So the MaxDoc talk actually was the first version of the Flywheel. I've changed that quite a bit. And so the material in this one, I think, was honestly a lot better. But also, there's something different about the live stream, and keeping an eye on the chat in the lower right corner for me, as opposed to responding to the verbal, I was going to say verbal outburst, but that sounds a little bit bad. The people just like randomly shouting out something in the middle of the talk. That happens at MaxDoc. Easier without 100 people staring at me? Maybe. Honestly, I don't know. So one of the things, this is a little bit related to my creative journey. How I got to where I am, I never wanted to be a public speaker. I never wanted to be a presenter. I was very happy being the guy in the background, pushing the dials, running the board. And as I kept thinking about what's next for me, I would, try something. First it was podcasting, and then it was webinars, and then it was public speaking. And at each stage, there was something about that scared the crap out of me, but I forced myself to do it. And then with public speaking specifically, the thing I loved about that was I realized being able to see people and like look them in the eye and tell whether they were actually getting it, whether what I was saying was resonating, was very helpful for me as a presenter. So I actually think I would prefer people staring at me because then I could know whether it's making sense. Being locked in my office here, going through my material and just hoping for comments to show up indicating that people are liking it is a little bit unnerving for me. But yeah, thank you, Gabor. I appreciate the comment about the live stream energy. That's a little bit of a balance for me. Again, I can't base it off of what I see from other people. So it's kind of finding that sweet spot of sounding excited, but not, burning myself out, if that makes any sense. I don't know. It's easier. It was easy for me in the moment, but when I was done, I was pretty exhausted. You can ask Rachel, but when I was at MaxDoc and I was doing that 90-minute workshop, that was actually really easy for me because I was getting that live feedback. So even just like a little bit of delayed feedback with the live stream is a little bit unnerving to me, but cool. All right. Well, thank you everybody for being on, and yeah, we'll do this again soon. If you've got any suggestions, topics you'd like to see me cover, send me an email, mike@mikeschmitz.com, and we'll talk to you again soon.